Hi, I've been working with food and drink businesses in the UK and across the world for the last 26 years. I help them decide what their strategy should be to make their businesses as profitable as they can, help them develop products, help people who have products find markets for them, and help people who want products find people that can make those products for them. I work with businesses outside the UK as well, helping them understand the UK and European markets and what will be expected of them in those markets. And that's why I've been asked to speak to you about finding the perfect NPD process. It sounds odd, but you actually have to know where you want to finish before you start your NPD project. And sometimes people, particularly people who are developing their first products or are in the early stages of setting up their business, find it very hard to imagine where they want their product to end. And because of that, it's very often helpful to collaborate with an expert from within the industry, somebody who has experience of going through that process before, because they're very likely to be able to anticipate things that you haven't thought about yet. And in the same way, working with a food expert on your NPD project can mean that they can very often second guess things, see things that might happen, and know the logical order in which you should do things so that you don't have to backtrack and repeat things. The first step in the process is to ask yourself, is there really a genuine need for your product? It's very easy when you are passionate about something to get caught up in that product and to think that nobody could live without it. But really, unless you have a very strong, unique case for a product, it's a lot of money to spend bringing something to market unless you're sure that you can get that money back out of the product in the future. We did some work a long time ago with a company that was selling spices, and they were selling small jars of spices into a discounted chain of houseware stores. When they started selling the products to this chain, they were selling them for 46 pence a pot into them, and they were retailing them for about £1. A competitor got involved and was trying to win the business, and the two of them began to outbid each other until they both ended up selling half the range to this company, and their price had been cut down to 36 pence a pot. It meant that our client wasn't actually making any money on it, but they were clinging on to it because they thought it was a big order. We showed them that there was no point in having a big order if it wasn't one that you were making money on, and we looked for alternatives for them and came up with a concept where they introduced a new shape of jar, which was one that you could put a spoon into the neck of. Very often in the UK, certainly, spice jars don't allow you to put a teaspoon in, so you can't get the product out that way. You have to shake the product out onto a spoon. So we did a wider neck jar that you could get the spoon in, and we offered a bespoke labelling service so that delis and farm shops and small retailers could have products with their own shop name on them or their own business name on them, to personalise it to their business. And the client started selling those spices to them at nearly £1 a jar. So sometimes it's not the product, sometimes it's just the way that you're presenting it and the offer you're making. But before you start, you really have to be sure that you have something that meets the needs of your customer and that you're very clear that it's a unique product. Step 2 is all about making sure that you are clear who your customer is before you develop your product. We have a company that we have done some work with who make cake decorating products. Most of the products that they sell are own label that they sell into the retailers under the retailer's own brands, and they had decided recently to do some branded products of their own. The products are tubes of icing in ready-to-use tubes. It's a very clean product. It's a very clean ingredient declaration on it. Comes in 3 flavours, strawberry, vanilla and chocolate. It's in a tube, so you can just literally squeeze it from the tube straight onto your cake, so you don't need a piping bag, and it has a shaped nozzle on it that allows you to do that. Now, in the first instance, they would consider their customers to be the retailers. So they're looking at the large multiple retailers in the UK and across Europe, and they're also looking at small specialist cake decorating shops and hobby shops, all of which have very different merchandising. And so they have to come up with a solution for putting the product onto the shelf Ideally something that just comes straight out of the outer box and goes straight onto the shelf, but has shelf presence and tells the kind of customer that would come into that shop what they would do with that product. Makes it easy for the retailer to sell it and merchandise it. They also have to look at, if that is their customer, how they organise things like media coverage around it, so that journalists are writing about the products as they're going into these stores to drive people towards the stores, looking at how they would use social media and websites to target the customers of those stores and get them looking for the products when they go into the stores, and anything else that they can do to make the product move easily off the shelf for the retailer. But the other customer in this case is the end customer, the consumer. Now, if you look at the product, it's an easy to use tube, so it's probably for people who are in a hurry. It's for people maybe who don't have very high skills in cake decorating, so might not have things like piping bags and nozzles and things at home, but might feel that either they could make some very basic cakes or they could buy some cakes and decorate them. In which case, what they need from the packaging is very different. They want to know from you what else they might have to buy in order to complete this. So they need cakes. Do they want to buy cakes, or do they want to use cakes that they're going to bake at home? Might they want sprinkles and other things to finish on the top of it? So all of that is very clear from the packaging, so they don't get home with this tube of icing and then find that they need a whole lot of other items that they haven't purchased. And also for them, things like pages on Pinterest full of ideas about how you can use the products. If this is not something that's well within their skill set, something they'd be confident about thinking about all the time, that will help drive sales. And making sure that when the magazines and people are talking about the products, they're using simple recipes and helping people create from something simple, something that they can make look very good and very expert. So lots of hints and tips and lots of things that would bring confidence. So it's very important that when the product is being designed initially, they consider both of these different consumers, both the immediate person who will make the purchasing decision and then the end user, the final person that will come to use the product, and that all the details are there for both of them. If you know your end game, then you can try and anticipate some of the scenarios that might come along. For instance, do you want to make your own product? What would the advantages and disadvantages of that be? If you've not produced your own food product before, if you haven't had experience of production, but you have an idea of a product, then maybe it's better initially that somebody else makes it for you and you learn while they're making it, and then you take it in-house. Or also sometimes just going straight out to production with somebody else can mean that you don't have the expensive setup cost of setting up a production kitchen. Especially if there's maybe only one or two products in your range to start with, it might be hard to justify that. If you're looking to supply into retail, what kind of standards are they expecting? Companies like NCSI in Australia are accredited to look at the BRC global standard for food safety, and that's used by companies like Coles. It's used a lot by businesses in Asia, and it's also something that Walmart would be looking for if you were looking to supply over to the USA. So have you got a manufacturer in mind? Does he have that accreditation? Is he willing to work on that accreditation with you to achieve it? Other things to think about: if you work inside a factory, making your recipes work in their factory and making those alterations yourself, using your own technical team to make those alterations, then can you negotiate that the recipes are actually yours, not theirs, and that you hang on to all the rights to those recipes? So in the future, if you wanted to, you could move factory and take those recipes with you. Other things to look at also are whether or not the manufacturer that you're going to use has the capability to grow with you. What are your plans for the next 3 years? Are they committed to being able to do that with you? Would they have the capacity? Would they have the cash flow for that? So these are all scenarios that you can think about beforehand. If you are a producer and you're being approached by people to make products for you and you're worried that they may move on Then, are there other things you can do to limit the risks? And perhaps there are. Perhaps you can charge a development fee for working on this sort of work, or have a clause that says that if they don't work with you and get their volumes up to a certain level, then you would charge them a fee at the end of a year or at the end of 2 years, so that you cover those costs. Whatever you do too, you need to just look at all the potential scenarios along the way and try and build in as much flexibility as you can with what you're doing. One of the hardest things often about bringing a product to market is finding the right person to make it for you, but it is really important that you think about all the options and all the possibilities and don't get tied into something too quickly that may constrain you when you try to grow the business. Step 4 is making a kitchen sample. Yep, we really have got to step 4 in this project without ever having made your product yet. But now you have to replicate as closely as you can what you think the manufactured product will look like. That means if your product is a ready meal and it contains chopped onion, then you buy in manufactured chopped onion. You don't go to your local greengrocers, choose an onion and chop it up, because the flavour, the size, everything about that will be different because of the process it's gone through, and you're going to end up with a very different tasting product. Replicate to the smallest detail everything you can. If you know there are constraints within your factory about particle size that can go down pipes and tubes, make sure the sample you start with would be capable of doing that. If you're going to need additional sauce in order to make something flow, if the fact that you're cooking in large batches will change the product, then try and cook it in a similar sized tray, or replicate as closely as you can what you're going to be doing. It's very important at this stage that you do that, and then that you go out to a good panel of people who, as much as possible, represent the group of people that you are saying are going to be your customers. Don't just pass this dish to some colleagues at lunchtime one day when they're hungry and ask them what they think of it. Really do go out to put your product in front of a panel of people who are likely to be the same as your panel, as your end consumers are going to be, and see what they think. Listen to what they say about the product, listen to what they struggle with about it, what puzzles them about it, what they wish was different, then come back and make any tweaks to the product that you think are relevant, and then go back out to panel again. Don't rush to move from the kitchen sample stage until you think you've eliminated as many things as you possibly can at this stage. Step 5 is considering things like packaging and shelf life. Packaging and brand is dealt with by Helen later in this conference, and so I'm not going to deal with that in any depth at the moment. It's just to say that you should give considerations to the ease of use of the end product for the customer, to look at things like the amount of space that something will take up, how best you can configure it in boxes and pallets to minimise the amount of space and the cost of transporting it, and then also to look at the shelf life of your product. The longer you can make your shelf life, the better it is for it to be handled in the chain. Now, obviously with some things that's not possible to extend shelf life, although sometimes things like the choice of packaging materials can give you an extra couple of days on a product. But look at the best way to present that product for your end user. If it's a food service product, it's frozen best, and then it's in their freezer, it comes straight from the freezer and goes to be cooked. And there's minimal wastage for them then, because they're not going to bring products out the freezer until they actually need them. Also on food service, you think about things like pack size, single portion, 2 and 4 portions rather than 20 portions, again to keep wastage and things down. So thinking about your shelf life, getting your shelf life tested at this stage are all part of it, and then looking together with your design team at ease of use of the product, safely transporting the product, and at packaging that will maximise the shelf life but also give the product the look you want it to have. If it's a retail product, making it something that people will pick up easily in store. Step 6 is about reviewing your costs. Now that you know what your pack format's going to be, what your packaging looks like, what the likely ingredient composition of your product is, and your recipe is beginning to be shaped up, you know what the legal limits are, the legal constraints for what's in your product, you should be able to arrive at a fairly accurate packaging cost and product cost now. Then you also need to look at the distribution of your product, the sort of margin that somebody's likely to expect, which, as I've indicated already, will be dependent to some extent on the shelf life of the product and how easy that product is to sell or how niche that product is. Then you also need to consider the distribution costs and the marketing costs, which you'll have looked at later on today. And you bring all of that together, and then you review your cost for the full product. Have you got a product that can compete in the marketplace at the price that you need to sell it at because of your costs that are involved in it? If you have, that's great. If you haven't, what can you alter about the product? Can you reconfigure it in its boxes? Can you cut down slightly on the packaging? Is there, does something need to be organic, or would another product substitute well in there? Are there other things you can source differently? Is there any deal to be done at any part in the process so that you can reduce the cost down? If there isn't, and you're entering a market at a higher than expected price, then I think you have to ask yourself really if this is a product that you want to launch. At this stage, you may feel you've already done a lot of work, but you haven't printed packaging, you haven't placed large orders for food, you haven't done a lot of other things, and there is still time to go back to the drawing board with it at this stage, because you want to go into the market at least with some strong competitive advantage. It's obviously not all about price, but the costs have to be realistic. People are not normally willing to pay twice as much as they do for something that seems similar or seems to fit a similar purpose to something else. It's very unusual to enter the market with a premium priced product when somebody else has got a more lower priced product that's similar to it. So do be careful, don't get too emotionally involved at this stage, and still consider that you can look back the way and either adapt or change or completely abandon the product. It will be much less expensive now than when you've got 100,000 of it in stock. Step 7 is your final technical checks, making sure that your product is microbiologically sound, that it has the standards that the retailers would expect you to have for a product of that type, that it meets all the consumers' needs, that your shelf life is right, that your pack labeling all meets all the required laws and standards. And remember too, if you're hoping to sell this product in more than one country, then you need to make sure your pack is compliant with each of the countries that you want to bring it into, or you need to have a plan for producing different packaging for different markets. So bear all that in mind and get all that right and make sure that everything is correct. Check it with your technical team. Things like labelling legislation change all the time. Don't assume anything. Before you go to print, make sure that everything has been signed off and double checked. Step 8, I'm going back on something I've already mentioned. Check that your pack label is legal and is all in place. This is very important. We've had an instance before of a customer who printed 100,000 boxes and then discovered that her company name wasn't unique, and she had to oversticker 100,000 boxes for her product with a sticker with a slightly different version of her company name with an additional word added to it. Obviously, it's a very expensive thing to do, and before you press the button to print on anything, you really do need to make sure that you have your company name registered, that you have the right web address for it, that you can get all those bits, because once you've pressed print and reeled off 100,000 boxes of something, it's too late to discover that that's not right. So I make no apologies for putting this one in again as an extra point. It is amazing how often something like this just slips through. Step 9 is your first factory trial. I am calling it your first factory trial because it's very unlikely it will be your only factory trial. Do as small a trial run as the factory equipment will allow. Inevitably, recipes will need tweaked at some point during this process, so it's best not to be overzealous about the quantities that you produce at this point. Once you're happy with the factory trial, use that product to go out and show to retailers. Have mocked up packaging on it and gauge their interest from what you're showing them. You can also, if you're confident that the product is going ahead and that you're going to launch it, you can use product from these trials to send out to journalists to start to create the first of your PR ahead for the product, and you can use it to produce your marketing collateral too. So you can use this product for your photography and any other collateral that you need to have to back up your product. So this is your first factory trial. There may well be a few. Step 10 is about getting your orders. Don't produce any product. Don't go to full-scale production. Don't order your packaging until somebody has placed a hard order for your product and you know you have enough volume to make having the packaging printed and carrying that stock of packaging worthwhile. Step 11, the product launches and you think you might be sitting back, but actually now this is when your real work begins. You need to monitor the quality of the product. You need to make sure that the product stays the same all through production. You need to be constantly re-evaluating the product and how it's selling in the market. And also, if other people bring other products to market, it's likely that if yours is successful, others will come. Do they have any features to them that are better than yours? Is there anything that you could make better? Have you had any feedback from customers that you think you could resolve by doing something differently? So you re-evaluate and improve, and that will continue for the whole of your product's life. Thank you very much for listening to this. I hope it's been of help to you. There's so much more I would have liked to have shared. It's very small snapshot really of the whole process. If you would like me to answer further questions for you in more detail, then my email details are on the slides.